Jamal Washington stared at the phone, blood trickling from his split lip. The airline CEO's voice trembled. "Mr. Washington, please reconsider your lawsuit. We'll pay anything." Jamal smiled. The white flight attendant who struck his son wouldn't get away with it this time. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in justice for everyone regardless of their skin color, hit that like button and subscribe now. The story I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil, but trust me, you'll want to stay until the very end to see how Jamal Washington turned the tables on a powerful airline corporation. Jamal Washington checked his Rolex one more time as he guided his son Isaiah through Atlanta International Airport's premium terminal. At 42, Jamal had achieved what many considered impossible for a black man from South Chicago. Building quantum innovations from a garage startup into a tech powerhouse on the verge of going public. Today's meeting with investors in San Francisco could seal their future with a valuation of over $3 billion. "You good, champ?" Jamal asked, placing a protective hand on Isaiah's shoulder. At 10 years old, Isaiah Washington was already showing signs of his father's brilliance, but recent bullying incidents at his private school had left the boy more withdrawn than usual. "Yeah, Dad. Just thinking about my science project," Isaiah replied, clutching his tablet where he'd been working on quantum computing theories that impressed even Jamal's senior engineers. The gate attendant's smile faltered slightly when they approached, her eyes darting to the first-class tickets in Jamal's hand as if confirming they weren't in the wrong line. "Oh, yes, Mr. Washington. You and your son are in first class, seats 2A and 2B. The subtle shift in her tone wasn't lost on Jamal. After years of building his company, he'd grown accustomed to the microaggressions, the raised eyebrows, the security guards following him in high-end stores even when he wore $3,000 suits. "Thank you," Jamal replied with practiced dignity, guiding Isaiah toward the jetway. The first-class cabin gleamed with luxury. As they settled into their plush leather seats, Jamal noticed the flight attendant, a blonde woman in her mid-30s whose name tag read Heather Sullivan, greeting passengers with warm smiles. "Good morning, Dr. Miller. Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" she asked an older white man across the aisle. "Mrs. Cunningham, lovely to see you again. Your usual mimosa." When she reached Jamal and Isaiah, her smile tightened. "Anything to drink?" she asked curtly, without using their names despite the passenger manifest clearly visible on her tablet. "Orange juice for my son, please." "Coffee for me, black," Jamal replied evenly. "I'll see what we have available once we're in the air," Heather responded, already turning toward the next passenger. "Good morning, Mr. Peterson. How's that daughter of yours doing at Yale?" As the cabin filled, Jamal noticed the sidelong glances from other passengers, the subtle shifting away when he reached for the shared armrest. A gray-haired businessman in an expensive suit muttered something to his companion about standards declining, while glancing in their direction. 20 minutes after takeoff, Heather had served every other first-class passenger their requested beverages. She finally approached with Isaiah's orange juice, placing it on his tray table without a word, then turned to leave. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely. "I believe I asked for coffee." Heather's nostrils flared slightly. "We're experiencing turbulence. I'll have to get that for you later." The plane was flying smooth as silk. The white businessman across the aisle was sipping his freshly poured scotch. Isaiah accidentally jostled his tray while reaching for his tablet, causing a small amount of orange juice to spill. Nothing reached the carpet or seats, just a small puddle on the plastic tray. "I'm sorry," the boy said immediately, reaching for his napkin. Heather appeared instantly, sighing dramatically. "This is why we can't have nice things," she muttered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "These people don't know how to behave in first class." Jamal felt his jaw tighten but maintained his composure. "Excuse me, could we have some additional napkins, please?" Heather acted as if she hadn't heard him, walking back toward the galley. The businessman nearby chuckled. Some folks just don't belong up here, no matter how much money they come into, he remarked to his seatmate, voice pitched to Carrie. Isaiah's shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on his tablet screen. Jamal recognized the posture. His son was making himself smaller, trying to disappear, just as he did when facing bullies at school. "It's okay, son," Jamal whispered. "Don't let them make you feel small. You belong anywhere you choose to be." But as the flight continued, the pattern persisted. Call button ignored. Meal preference accidentally lost. Heather's curt responses when forced to interact with them contrasted sharply with her warm attentiveness to the white passengers. Jamal had experienced this treatment countless times before. But watching his son face it, seeing Isaiah's bright spirit dimming with each interaction, was something else entirely. The boy who had bounced excitedly about flying in first class was now silent, trying to be invisible. And something in Jamal began to burn. 2 hours into the flight, Isaiah looked up from his tablet with an urgent expression. "Dad, I need to use the restroom." Jamal nodded. "Go ahead, son. I'll be right here." Isaiah carefully made his way toward the front of the cabin where the first-class lavatory was located. As he approached, Heather had just emerged from the galley with a beverage cart, blocking the narrow aisle. "Excuse me," Isaiah said softly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Heather continued arranging glasses on her cart as if she hadn't heard him. Isaiah waited patiently for nearly a minute before speaking again, slightly louder. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to get to the restroom." When Heather finally turned, her expression was one of exaggerated annoyance. "You'll have to wait until I'm finished here." "But I really need to." As Isaiah tried to squeeze past, his shoulder accidentally bumped the cart, causing a water glass to tip over. No liquid spilled on Heather, the glass simply toppled onto the cart with a clatter. The transformation in Heather's face was immediate and terrifying. Her professional mask dropped completely as she grabbed Isaiah's arm. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her fingers digging into the boy's skin. "Don't you know how to behave? Who raised you?" Isaiah froze, his eyes widening in panic. In that moment, he wasn't in a luxury aircraft cabin. He was back in the school hallway 3 months ago, surrounded by older boys calling him names, telling him he didn't belong in their prestigious academy, no matter how smart he was, no matter how much money his father had. That day, Isaiah had frozen just like this, unable to speak, unable to move, as the boys taunted him with racial slurs and pushed him against the lockers. A teacher had eventually intervened, but the school administration had downplayed the incident, calling it boys being boys. Isaiah had nightmares for weeks afterward. Now, as Heather loomed over him, that same terror returned. His throat closed up. His hands began to shake. Jamal was out of his seat in an instant, moving toward his son with controlled urgency. "Please take your hand off my son," he said, his voice low but firm. Heather didn't release Isaiah. Instead, she turned her glare on Jamal. "Your son needs to learn some manners. He deliberately knocked into my cart." "It was an accident," Jamal replied, maintaining his calm despite the fury building inside him. "He's a child who needs to use the restroom. Please let him go." "I know what I saw," Heather insisted, her voice rising. "He did it on purpose. This kind of behavior is unacceptable in first class." Several white passengers were watching now. Some had phones discreetly raised, recording the confrontation. None intervened. "My son apologized for the accident," Jamal said evenly. "Now please let him go to the restroom." "This is exactly the problem," Heather said, releasing Isaiah's arm but blocking his path to the lavatory. "You people think you can just do whatever you want with no consequences." The cabin seemed to go silent at the phrase, "you people." Isaiah looked up at his father, eyes pleading for help. "I'm going to have to ask you to watch your language and your assumptions," Jamal said, placing himself between Heather and his son. "Isaiah, go ahead to the restroom. As Isaiah tried to move past, Heather stepped sideways to block him again. "Don't you walk away when I'm talking to you," she snapped at the boy. "Ma'am," Jamal's voice took on an edge now, "my son needs to use the restroom. This is becoming harassment." "Harassment?" Heather laughed incredulously. "I'm doing my job maintaining order on this flight." "Marshall," she called toward the front of the cabin. "Marshall, I need assistance." A broad-shouldered white man in plain clothes stood up from the first row. Air Marshal Gregory Pearson moved with practiced authority, his hand instinctively touching his hip where his weapon was concealed. "What's the situation?" he asked, eyes immediately fixing on Jamal rather than Heather. "This passenger and his son are being disruptive," Heather said quickly. "The boy damaged airline property, and the father is becoming aggressive." "That's completely false," Jamal countered, keeping his hands visible, acutely aware of how quickly this situation could escalate if the marshal perceived him as a threat. "My son accidentally bumped a cart while trying to reach the lavatory. No damage occurred. The flight attendant is blocking him from using the facilities," and made a racially charged comment. Pearson's gaze hardened. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately." "My son needs to use the restroom," Jamal repeated, his patience wearing thin but knowing that showing anger would only confirm their biased assumptions. Isaiah, still frozen in place, finally found his voice. "I didn't mean to bump the cart," he said, his words tumbling out. "It was an accident. I said I was sorry." "Nobody's talking to you," Heather snapped, turning toward the boy. And then it happened. As Isaiah raised his hand slightly, perhaps to gesture as he spoke, Heather's arm swung out. Her open palm connected with Isaiah's cheek with a crack that seemed to echo through the cabin. Isaiah's head snapped to the side from the force of the slap. A red mark bloomed instantly on his brown skin. The cabin went completely silent. Even Pearson looked shocked. In that terrible moment, Jamal felt something he'd spent his entire adult life controlling: pure, unfiltered rage. His hands curled into fists at his sides. But then he saw Isaiah's face, the shock, the hurt, the confusion, and knew that his son needed him to remain in control. One wrong move, one justifiable but ill-advised reaction, and he could end up in handcuffs or worse, leaving Isaiah alone and terrified. Instead of retaliating, Jamal pulled out his phone and held it up. "My son is 10 years old. You just assaulted a minor on camera." Multiple passengers witnessed it. Indeed, several passengers had captured the slap on their phones. From the back of first class, another black passenger stood up. "I saw the whole thing," the man said. "The boy did nothing wrong. That slap was completely unprovoked." Two more black passengers from business class, who had witnessed the scene from the curtain divider, added their voices. "The flight attendant has been treating them differently the entire flight," one woman stated firmly. "This is discrimination, plain and simple." Heather's face flushed red. "He was about to hit me. I was defending myself. The videos clearly showed otherwise." Isaiah, tears streaming silently down his face, was shaking uncontrollably now. "My son has never raised his hand to anyone in his life," Jamal said, his voice deadly quiet as he put his arm around Isaiah's shoulders. "But you just taught him exactly what some people in this country think of black children, no matter how well behaved, no matter what seat they're sitting in." Air Marshal Pearson, realizing the gravity of the situation, finally intervened. "Ms. Sullivan, step back to the galley please." To Jamal, he said, "Sir, this incident will be reported. For now, please take your son back to your seat. After he uses the restroom," Jamal insisted, refusing to budge on this point. Pearson nodded curtly, and Jamal escorted his trembling son to the lavatory door. "I'm right outside," he told Isaiah gently. "Take your time, buddy." As the door closed, Jamal turned to find the captain emerging from the cockpit, his expression grim. "Mr. Washington," the captain said, having checked the passenger manifest, I apologize for this incident. However, due to the disruption, we'll be making an emergency landing in Denver to address the situation. The disruption, Jamal repeated flatly, of my son being assaulted by your employee? The captain had the decency to look uncomfortable. We'll sort everything out on the ground, sir. As Jamal returned to stand outside the lavatory, waiting for Isaiah, he could hear Heather in the galley, her voice carrying clearly, I don't care who he thinks he is. These people need to learn their place. In that moment, Jamal Washington made a decision. This wouldn't be brushed aside with an apology and a voucher. Not this time. Not when it involved his son. The plane touched down at Denver International Airport 40 minutes later, emergency vehicles lining the runway as if responding to a terrorist threat rather than a flight attendant's assault on a child. Through the windows, Isaiah watched the flashing lights with wide, fearful eyes. Are they going to arrest us, Dad? He whispered. The question broke something in Jamal's heart. No, son. We've done nothing wrong. But as the aircraft taxied to the gate, Jamal wasn't entirely sure. He'd seen too many situations where innocence wasn't protection enough, where the color of one's skin predetermined guilt in the eyes of authority. When the door opened, 2 airport police officers boarded, followed by airline representatives. The lead officer, a stern-faced white man, approached Jamal and Isaiah's seats directly. Sir, we need you and your son to come with us, he stated, hand resting on his holster. May I ask why? Jamal inquired calmly. My son was assaulted by your flight attendant. There are multiple witnesses and video evidence. We'll sort all that out in the terminal. Please come with us now. As they stood to leave, several passengers called out, the flight attendant hit the boy for no reason. Check the videos before you do anything. This is racial profiling happening right in front of us. The officers escorted Jamal and Isaiah down the jetway, where they were met by more police and airline security. Isaiah clung to his father's hand, his earlier excitement about flying in first class replaced by humiliation and fear. In the terminal's security office, they were separated, Jamal directed to one room, Isaiah to another. Absolutely not, Jamal stated firmly. My son is a minor who has just been assaulted. He stays with me, or we call my attorney right now. The standoff lasted several tense minutes until Lieutenant Diana Reynolds arrived. As the ranking officer, her presence immediately changed the dynamic. What's going on here? She asked, taking in the scene. Disruptive passengers removed from Flight 2387, one officer began. They weren't being disruptive, interrupted a passenger who had followed from the plane, holding up her phone. I have the whole thing on video. The flight attendant slapped this child across the face. Lieutenant Reynolds, a black woman in her 40s, glanced at the phone, then at Isaiah's face where the mark from Heather's slap was still visible. Let me see that footage, she said, extending her hand for the phone. After watching for less than a minute, her expression hardened. Get the flight attendant in here now, she ordered. And stop treating these people like suspects. As the dynamic shifted, Jamal pulled out his own phone to call Samuel Turner, his attorney. The call went straight to voicemail. Sam, it's Jamal Washington. There's been an incident on my flight to San Francisco. A flight attendant assaulted Isaiah. We're currently detained in Denver. Call me back immediately. Jamal checked his watch. The investor meeting in San Francisco was starting in 3 hours, a meeting that could determine quantum innovation's future. There was no way they would make it now. Outside the security office, phones were buzzing with notifications. The videos were already circulating online, spawning hashtags and outrage. But initially, the framing was questionable. Disruption forces emergency landing, child and father removed from flight, confrontation in first class leads to diversion. The airline's PR team was working overtime, releasing a statement that a passenger altercation required intervention, without mentioning that the altercation involved their employee striking a child. Lieutenant Reynolds returned with a different energy. "Mr. Washington, I've reviewed multiple videos and spoken with several witnesses. You and your son are free to go. We'll be taking statements from the flight attendant. And the air marshal who stood by and did nothing until after my son was assaulted?" Jamal added. Reynolds nodded. "Him too. We're arranging accommodations for you and transportation on the next available flight." As they exited the security area, Jamal noticed the shift in how airport staff looked at them, the whispers, the double takes. Someone had recognized him. "Mr. Washington." Jamal Washington of Quantum Innovations. A gate agent approached hesitantly. "Sir, we had no idea. The airline CEO's office is calling. They're arranging a private jet for you and your son immediately." Jamal's expression remained impassive. "So my son deserves not to be assaulted because I'm wealthy? What about all the other black passengers who face this treatment daily without the resources I have?" The agent stammered, unsure how to respond. In the terminal lounge, Jamal and Isaiah encountered 3 other black travelers who had been on their flight. One was Dr. Lawrence Mitchell, a neurosurgeon returning from a conference. "I filed 8 complaints against this airline in the past year alone," Dr. Mitchell told Jamal. "Downgraded without explanation, random security checks every time, luggage lost repeatedly. They always offer miles or vouchers, but nothing changes." Jamal's phone rang, Samuel Turner returning his call. After explaining the situation, the attorney's response was immediate: "Document everything. Get witness statements now before they leave. I'm filing for preservation of evidence first thing, security footage, crew records, past complaints. This isn't just about damages, Jamal. This is about systemic change." Isaiah sat quietly during this conversation, the excitement that usually filled him when discussing his father's business now completely absent. When Jamal hung up, he found his son staring at his reflection in the window glass, fingers lightly touching the fading mark on his cheek. "They did it because we're black, didn't they?" Isaiah asked, his voice small but certain. "Just like those boys at school." Jamal crouched beside his son, meeting his eyes in the reflection. "Some people fear what they don't understand, or what's different from them. But that's their weakness, not ours. And sometimes, fighting back doesn't mean using our fists. It means using our minds, our resources, and our voices to create change." "But will it work?" Isaiah asked. "I don't know," Jamal answered honestly. "But I do know we have to try. Not just for us, but for everyone who doesn't have the platform we do." As they prepared to board the private jet hastily arranged by the now panicking airline, Jamal's phone exploded with notifications. The videos had gone viral, the narrative shifting as the full story emerged. And along with public outrage came scrutiny, of Jamal, of Isaiah, of their worthiness to be believed. The battle was just beginning. What would you do if you were in Jamal's position? Would you accept the airline's attempts to smooth things over with special treatment, or would you fight for systemic change like Jamal? Comment number 1 if you think Jamal should pursue legal action, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up against injustice. Have you ever witnessed discrimination while traveling? What do you think will happen when the airline CEO discovers exactly who Jamal Washington is? Stay tuned for what happens next. William Bradford, CEO of Transcontinental Airways, scrolled through the social media firestorm erupting on his phone with growing alarm. The hashtag Justice for Isaiah was trending nationwide, with the video of flight attendant Heather Sullivan slapping a young black child in first class being shared millions of times. "Get Sullivan on the phone now," he barked at his assistant. "And find out everything you can about this Washington person. Probably some opportunist looking for a payday." His crisis management team had already crafted a carefully worded statement: Transcontinental Airways is deeply concerned about the incident on Flight 2387. The employee in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We take all allegations seriously and are committed to providing a safe, respectful environment for all passengers. Bradford's phone rang. It was the airline's chief legal counsel, Patricia Harding. "Will, we have a serious problem," she said without preamble. "The passenger involved is Jamal Washington." "Am I supposed to know that name?" Bradford asked irritably. "Founder and CEO of Quantum Innovations. Self-made tech genius who built a quantum computing empire from nothing. They're about to go public with a projected $3 billion valuation. He sits on multiple Fortune 500 boards, advises the Commerce Department on technology policy, and donates millions to civil rights organizations." Bradford's blood ran cold. "You're telling me our flight attendant slapped the son of a billionaire tech pioneer? On camera?" "A black billionaire tech pioneer with enormous public goodwill and influence in both business and politics," Patricia clarified. "And his attorney just filed notice of intent to sue for assault, racial discrimination, negligence, and civil rights violations. They're not asking for a specific dollar amount." "Meaning they don't want money," Bradford realized. "They want blood." "Exactly. Washington has already declined our offer to arrange private transportation and accommodation. He told our representative, and I quote, 'This isn't about me receiving special treatment because of who I am. It's about changing how you treat passengers because of what they are.'" Bradford leaned back in his leather chair, staring out at the Manhattan skyline from his corner office. "Find out what he wants. Everyone has a price." "There's more," Patricia continued. "Our stock is already down 12% since trading opened. Major shareholders are calling. And the Department of Transportation just announced they're launching an investigation into our passenger treatment policies." As Bradford hung up, his assistant entered with a tablet. "Sir, you should see this. It's about Washington." The screen showed a profile of Jamal Washington from Business Insider, from South Chicago to Silicon Valley, how Jamal Washington overcame systemic barriers to build a tech empire. The article detailed Washington's rise from a housing project in Chicago's South Side, where he'd taught himself programming on discarded computers he'd repaired. Despite graduating top of his class, he'd been repeatedly passed over for jobs at major tech firms, often watching less qualified white candidates receive offers. After 3 years of rejections, he'd started Quantum Innovations in his apartment, developing proprietary algorithms that eventually revolutionized quantum computing accessibility. Along the way, he'd faced discriminatory lending practices, investor bias, and persistent attempts to steal his intellectual property. Now, 15 years later, Quantum Innovations employed over 500 people, held dozens of patents, and was about to become one of the most valuable tech IPOs of the year. And Transcontinental Airways employee had slapped his only child. Bradford's phone buzzed with a text from the board chair, "Emergency meeting in 1 hour. Fix this now." Meanwhile, in San Francisco, Jamal sat in a hotel suite, watching Isaiah sleep fitfully on the sofa. The boy had barely spoken during their private flight to California, the trauma of the public humiliation still raw. Jamal's phone hadn't stopped ringing, investors concerned about the missed meeting, media requesting statements, other black business leaders offering support. But it was the call from his company's lead investor that worried him most. "Jamal, I understand your outrage, but the IPO timing is critical," Vincent Chen had said. "The market window won't stay open forever. This lawsuit could delay everything by months, maybe years." "Some things are more important than timing, Vincent," Jamal had replied. "My son watched me build this company by standing firm on our principles. What lesson would I be teaching him if I backed down now just for money?" The conversation had ended tensely, with implied threats about reconsidering investment positions. Now, as Isaiah whimpered in his sleep, likely reliving the incident, Jamal's resolve hardened. He opened his laptop and drafted an email to his board of directors. "Today, my son experienced what millions of black Americans face regularly, the assumption of wrongdoing based solely on skin color, followed by disproportionate punishment for imagined offenses. As a company built on creating more equitable access to technology, we cannot in good conscience remain silent when confronted with systemic discrimination. Our pursuit of justice in this matter aligns perfectly with our corporate values of integrity and equality. Any investor uncomfortable with these values is welcome to reconsider their position with Quantum Innovations. Within minutes of sending it, his phone rang. It was Bradford himself. "Mr. Washington, this is William Bradford, CEO of Transcontinental Airways. First, let me express my sincere apologies for the inexcusable incident involving your son. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation and assurances that the employee in question will be terminated immediately." "Mr. Bradford," Jamal replied evenly, "if you've done your research, you know money isn't my motivation. I want systemic change in how your airline treats passengers of color." "We take diversity very seriously," Bradford began. "So seriously that your flight attendant felt comfortable using the phrase, 'you people,' before assaulting my 10-year-old son. So seriously that your air marshal's first instinct was to treat us as threats rather than victims. So seriously that your initial press statement didn't even acknowledge that your employee struck a child." There was silence on the line. "Here's what's going to happen," Jamal continued. "Your airline will implement comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, create transparent reporting mechanisms for discrimination complaints, and establish an independent review board that includes civil rights experts to evaluate your policies and their implementation. Additionally, you will make substantial investments in scholarship programs for underrepresented minorities in aviation. Mr. Washington, while we appreciate your suggestions, you must understand that implementing such sweeping changes would require board approval, regulatory consideration, union negotiations. Then I suggest you start those conversations immediately," Jamal interrupted. "Because I'm prepared to use every resource at my disposal to ensure this isn't brushed aside. My attorney will be in touch with specifics." After hanging up, Jamal checked social media. The airline's damage control was in full swing, with suspicious accounts suddenly sharing stories about disruptive passengers. Several tabloid sites were running pieces questioning whether Isaiah had actually provoked the incident, despite clear video evidence to the contrary. More troublingly, business publications were running analyses of how the controversy might affect Quantum Innovations' IPO prospects, with some suggesting Jamal was playing the race card to distract from rumored technical delays in their flagship product. As if on cue, Jamal's phone pinged with an alert. A tech blog known for industry gossip had just published an article. Sources claim Quantum Innovations' core technology doesn't work as advertised. Is Washington's airline drama a distraction? The article cited anonymous, industry insiders, questioning the company's patents and suggesting major investors were getting cold feet even before the airline incident. It was a hit piece, clearly coordinated to pressure him into settling quietly. But they had underestimated their opponent. Jamal had built his company while facing much worse. His phone rang again, this time Samuel Turner with news that would change everything. "Jamal, we've discovered Heather Sullivan has 7 previous complaints of discriminatory treatment filed against her in the past 3 years. All by passengers of color, all quietly settled with NDAs. And get this, we found internal emails showing airline management was aware of the pattern but kept her on because she was popular with preferred customers, meaning wealthy white passengers." Jamal's expression hardened. They knew. They knew, and they did nothing until it affected someone with the power to fight back. "There's more," Samuel continued. "The airline has a coded system in their customer database that flags certain passengers for enhanced service monitoring. Statistical analysis shows these flags are disproportionately applied to passengers with traditionally African American or Hispanic names, regardless of their status or ticket class." That night, as Isaiah finally slept peacefully with the help of a mild sedative prescribed by a doctor, Jamal made 2 decisions. First, Quantum Innovations' IPO would proceed as planned. He wouldn't let his company or employees suffer for his stand. Second, no settlement with the airline would include an NDA. The world would know exactly what Transcontinental Airways had done, and exactly what they had tried to hide. When Bradford called again the next morning, desperation had replaced his corporate smoothness. "Mr. Washington, please. Our stock has fallen 20%. Major customers are canceling contracts. We can't withstand a prolonged public battle." "Neither could my son when your employee struck him," Jamal replied. "But unlike your company, he didn't have the option to make it go away with money." The first nightmare came 3 days after they returned home to Oakland Hills. Jamal woke to the sound of Isaiah screaming, found him tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, eyes wide but unseeing. "They're holding me down," Isaiah cried, still caught in the dream. "I can't breathe." Jamal gathered his son in his arms, rocking him gently until the terror subsided. "I've got you, champ. You're safe. I'm right here." As Isaiah's breathing steadied, Jamal fought back his own tears. In building his company, he'd faced discrimination, rejection, and outright sabotage, but nothing had prepared him for the helpless rage of watching his child suffer and being unable to shield him from the world's cruelty. Since Angela's death from cancer 3 years ago, it had been just the two of them. Jamal had restructured his entire life to be both mother and father to Isaiah, scheduling board meetings around school events, taking red-eye flights to avoid missing bedtimes. They'd healed together, found their rhythm as a team of two. Now, holding his traumatized son, Jamal wondered if he'd made the right choice in pursuing the lawsuit. Was justice worth this cost? "I'm sorry, Dad," Isaiah whispered, his voice small in the darkened room. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Jamal replied firmly. "Everyone's talking about us. About me. At school, online, everywhere." It was true. Despite Jamal's efforts to shield Isaiah, the viral videos had made them both unwilling public figures. Commentators debated their case on national news. Strangers recognized them on the street. Isaiah's private school had called with concerns about the attention. The next morning, Jamal contacted Dr. Zoe Chen, a child psychologist specializing in racial trauma. Her practice normally had a 6-month waiting list, but she made room for an emergency session that afternoon. In Dr. Chen's warmly lit office, Isaiah sat stiffly on the edge of a comfortable chair, eyes downcast. "Sometimes when scary things happen, they stay with us even after they're over," Dr. Chen explained gently. "That doesn't mean we're weak. It means we're human." Over the next hour, Isaiah slowly opened up about not just the incident on the plane, but the bullying at school that had preceded it. How a group of white classmates had surrounded him in the hallway, told him he only got admitted because of diversity quotas, that his academic achievements must be fake. "The teacher who found us just told them to run along to class," Isaiah recalled bitterly. "Then she told me not to be so sensitive." Dr. Chen nodded. Adults often minimize these experiences because acknowledging them means acknowledging the system that allows them to happen. After the session, she spoke privately with Jamal. "Isaiah is experiencing acute stress response, which is normal after such an event. But I'm more concerned about the cumulative effect of repeated racial traumas. The incident on the plane reinforced messages he's been receiving at school, that he doesn't belong, that he'll be punished more harshly for the same behaviors, that authority figures won't protect him. What can I do?" Jamal asked, the tech genius who could solve complex computing problems feeling completely out of his depth. "Keep doing what you're doing, validate his experiences, maintain routines, and most importantly, show him how to channel these experiences productively. Your lawsuit is actually modeling an important lesson about standing up against injustice." The following week, Jamal attended a meeting with Isaiah's school principal, Dr. Henderson, a white woman in her 50s who seemed more concerned with the school's reputation than Isaiah's well-being. "While we certainly don't condone bullying," she said, folding her hands on her desk, "we do worry that Isaiah may be hypersensitive to normal childhood interactions. Not everything is about race, Mr. Washington." Jamal leaned forward. When white students surround my black son and tell him he doesn't belong here because of his skin color, that is explicitly about race, Dr. Henderson. Children repeat things they hear without understanding, which is precisely why these incidents require intervention, not dismissal, Jamal interrupted. These students are learning that there are no consequences for racist behavior. Dr. Henderson sighed. Mr. Washington, I understand the airline incident has been upsetting, but perhaps it would be best for Isaiah to simply move past it rather than dwelling on it. Making everything about race won't help him succeed in the real world. Jamal stood, his patience exhausted. The real world is where my son was assaulted for being black in first class, Dr. Henderson. Pretending racism doesn't exist won't protect him from it. It will only leave him unprepared and blame him for his own victimization. The conversation ended with vague promises to look into the bullying incidents, but Jamal left considering alternative schooling options. When Isaiah returned to class the following day, the whispers and stares were immediate. Some students asked intrusive questions about the viral video. Others avoided him completely. A few made snide comments about playing the victim and getting people fired for nothing. By lunchtime, Isaiah was eating alone in a bathroom stall. That might have been the end of it, another black child isolated and silenced, except for Benjamin Harris, Isaiah's science teacher. Mr. Harris, a young white man with a reputation for demanding excellence from all his students, found Isaiah in the bathroom. Instead of forcing him back to the cafeteria, Mr. Harris simply sat on the floor outside the stall. You know, he said conversationally, when I was about your age, I watched my mother get treated horribly at a department store because she had an accent. She's from Guatemala. The salespeople followed her around, checked her bags, made comments about these immigrants right in front of us. Isaiah remained silent, but Mr. Harris could hear him listening. I was so ashamed at the time, not of my mother, but of myself, because I didn't know what to do, how to help her. I just wanted to disappear. He paused. But later, I realized something important. My silence didn't protect me or her. It just protected the people who were wrong. The bathroom stall slowly opened. Isaiah looked out, eyes red but dry. Everyone's talking about me, he said. They saw the video. Yes, Mr. Harris acknowledged. And that means you have something powerful, a platform. A chance to help other kids understand what this feels like, if you choose to use it. The next day, during free writing period, Isaiah began working on something different from his usual science fiction stories. Mr. Harris noticed but didn't comment, simply offering encouragement as Isaiah worked intensely, erasing and rewriting for nearly a week. When Jamal came to pick up Isaiah on Friday, Mr. Harris asked to speak with him privately. Isaiah wrote something I think you should read, he said, handing over several neatly handwritten pages. He's given me permission to share it with you. The essay was titled, Invisible Unless I'm a Problem, Being Black in White Spaces. In clear, powerful prose, Isaiah described the constant calculations required to navigate school, stores, and now airplanes. How he monitored his volume, his movements, his emotions. How he made himself smaller to avoid being perceived as threatening, even at 10 years old. How the flight attendant's slap had confirmed his worst fears. That no matter how perfectly he behaved, his blackness would always be seen as provocation. But the essay didn't end in despair. Instead, Isaiah wrote, after the incident, I wanted to hide. But then I realized that's what they want, for people like me to be quiet, to disappear. If I stay silent, nothing changes. Other kids will face the same treatment. So even though it's scary, I'm choosing to speak up. Not just for myself, but for everyone who gets treated differently because of how they look. Jamal found himself blinking back tears as he read his son's words. That evening, he found Isaiah working on his tablet in their home library. Mr. Harris showed me your essay, Jamal said, sitting beside him. It's incredibly powerful, son. Isaiah looked up nervously. Do you think I should show it to other people? Like, maybe at the school assembly next week? Mr. Harris said they're discussing community values and he could help me get a speaking slot. Jamal's protective instincts flared. Public speaking would put Isaiah in an even more vulnerable position, expose him to more scrutiny and potentially more backlash. But looking at his son's face, the hope there, the determination, he realized that shielding Isaiah from challenges wouldn't help him overcome them. It's your story to tell, Jamal said finally. If you want to share it, I'll support you completely. But you don't have to. No one would blame you for keeping it private. Isaiah considered this, then said, when Mom was sick, she told me that the hardest experiences can become our greatest strengths if we use them to help others. I think this is what she meant. Jamal's throat tightened at the mention of Angela. She had faced her illness with extraordinary grace, using her final months to establish a foundation providing technology education for underserved communities. She would be so proud of you, Jamal said softly. I know I am. As the assembly date approached, Isaiah worked with Dr. Chen on coping strategies for public speaking and potential negative reactions. He practiced his speech with Mr. Harris, refined his arguments, prepared for questions. The night before, another nightmare woke him. But this time, instead of crying out, Isaiah came to Jamal's room and sat on the edge of the bed. Dad? If I do this tomorrow, will it make a difference? Will anything actually change? Jamal sat up, considering his response carefully. I can't promise that everything will change overnight. The airline might fight our lawsuit. Some people at school might still treat you unfairly. But speaking your truth has power, even if the change happens slowly. He took Isaiah's hand. When I started Quantum Innovations, everyone said a black man couldn't raise venture capital for a quantum computing company. They said the barriers were too high, the bias too entrenched. And they weren't entirely wrong, it was harder for me. But if I'd stayed silent and accepted those limitations, where would we be now? Isaiah nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. So even if it's hard, it's worth trying. Exactly. And remember, you're not doing it alone. I'm right beside you every step of the way. The next morning, as Isaiah stood before his entire school, students, teachers, and many parents who had come specifically to hear him speak, Jamal watched from the back of the auditorium, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and immense pride. Isaiah's voice started quietly but grew stronger with each word. He didn't shout or accuse. He simply told his story, asked his questions, and invited his community to reflect. I don't want special treatment, he concluded. I just want the same respect automatically given to others. And I think that's something everyone in this room deserves, no matter what you look like or where you come from. The silence that followed was broken by Mr. Harris, who stood and began applauding. One by one, others joined, first other black students and their parents, then gradually most of the room. Not everyone applauded. Some parents looked uncomfortable, some students confused. But something had shifted. A conversation had begun that couldn't easily be dismissed. As Isaiah returned to his seat, Jamal received a text from Samuel Turner, judge denied airline's motion to dismiss. Case proceeding to discovery. They're panicking. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, watching his son walk tall despite his fears, Jamal knew they were already winning the war that mattered most. Is it right for Jamal to encourage Isaiah to speak publicly about his traumatic experience, or should he be more protective? Comment number 1 if you think Isaiah's bravery will help create change, or number 2 if you believe Jamal should shield him from more public attention. Like this video if you believe speaking up against injustice is important even when it's difficult. What do you think will happen when the airline realizes they can't intimidate the Washingtons into silence? How will they try to fight back? Subscribe to find out in the next part of this powerful story. The conference room in downtown San Francisco hummed with tension as Camille Rodriguez spread documents across the polished table. At 45, Rodriguez had built a reputation as one of the nation's most formidable civil rights attorneys, with a string of landmark victories against corporate giants. The airline filed for confidential arbitration, she explained to Jamal. They're desperate to keep this out of open court. Standard playbook. Bury it in private proceedings, bind everyone with NDAs, issue a vague statement about resolving differences amicably. And if we refuse? Jamal asked. Rodriguez smiled, a sharp expression that had made corporate defense attorneys nervous for 2 decades. Their motion to compel arbitration was denied this morning. Judge Terrence Maxwell is allowing the case to proceed in federal court. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Maxwell? Isn't he known for being conservative? Extremely. Appointed during the previous administration, rarely rules in favor of discrimination plaintiffs. But even he couldn't ignore the evidence here. She tapped a folder. Which brings me to our first major breakthrough. Inside the folder were personnel files for Heather Sullivan and Air Marshal Gregory Pearson, obtained through discovery. Sullivan has 17 complaints filed against her over 5 years, Rodriguez explained. 11 from passengers of color. All alleging variations of the same behavior, selective enforcement of rules, demeaning language, disproportionate responses to minor issues or perceived disrespect. And they kept her on staff? Jamal asked incredulously. Not only that, she received performance bonuses every year. Internal evaluations praise her for maintaining cabin standards and ensuring appropriate passenger behavior. Rodriguez's tone made the coded language clear. Pearson's file was equally troubling. Before becoming an air marshal, he'd worked for 3 different police departments, transferring each time after complaints about excessive force against minority suspects. None had resulted in discipline. But here's what really breaks this open, Rodriguez continued, sliding over a stack of emails. Internal communications from Transcontinental's executive team discussing passenger demographics and customer comfort concerns. The emails, spanning 5 years, revealed an explicit strategy to maintain the premium cabin experience by subtly discouraging certain passengers, specifically those who didn't fit the airline's desired passenger profile. One email from Bradford himself read, "First class is our flagship product and needs to reflect the appropriate image. Flight attendants should use their discretion in enforcing standards more rigorously when necessary to maintain the environment our core customers expect." Another, from the VP of Customer Experience, stated, "While we obviously cannot explicitly discriminate, we can ensure that passengers who don't meet our unstated expectations don't feel comfortable enough to return." Jamal felt cold anger as he read through the exchanges. They codified discrimination into company policy. Exactly, Rodriguez confirmed. And there's more. We found evidence they're pressuring witnesses from the flight. 2 passengers who initially provided statements supporting your account have suddenly revised their recollections. While Rodriguez built their legal case, Jamal faced mounting challenges at Quantum Innovations. Their IPO hadn't been derailed, but several major investors had reduced their planned participation, citing concerns about management focus during the lawsuit. Board member Vincent Chen had become increasingly vocal about his objections. After a particularly tense meeting, he cornered Jamal in the hallway. "This crusade of yours is costing the company millions in potential valuation," Chen hissed. "We built this business to create shareholder value, not to be your personal social justice platform. We built this business to revolutionize computing while maintaining ethical standards," Jamal corrected calmly. "Those standards include not looking the other way when faced with systematic discrimination." Chen's expression hardened. "The board is losing confidence, Jamal. If you don't start putting the company first, there will be consequences." The threat wasn't subtle. As the largest individual investor after Jamal himself, Chen had significant influence with other board members. A vote of no confidence could remove Jamal from his position as CEO, from the very company he had founded. That evening, Jamal received a disturbing call from Isaiah's school. Someone had created fake social media accounts in Isaiah's name, posting inflammatory content designed to discredit him and make him a target for harassment. Simultaneously, anonymous calls had been made to the school administration suggesting Isaiah had behavioral problems predating the airline incident. These weren't random acts. They were coordinated attempts to undermine Isaiah's credibility as a witness and damage the Washington family's reputation. When Samuel Turner investigated, he discovered the digital attacks originated from IP addresses linked to a crisis management firm recently retained by Transcontinental Airways. "They're playing extremely dirty," Turner warned Jamal. "And it's going to get worse before it gets better." He was right. The next day, a business publication ran an article questioning Quantum Innovations' patent claims, citing anonymous sources within the company. The stock dropped 7% before trading closed. Then came the personal surveillance, unmarked cars parked near their home, strange clicks on phone calls, signs of attempted intrusions into Jamal's email accounts. "They're looking for leverage," Rodriguez explained during a secure meeting in her office, where they'd left their phones outside to prevent potential eavesdropping. "Anything they can use to pressure you into settling. Financial irregularities, personal indiscretions, skeletons in the closet." Jamal smiled grimly. "They won't find any. I've lived my entire professional life knowing I'd be held to a higher standard because of my color. Every contract, every tax filing, every business decision. I've always known they had to be beyond reproach." The pressure campaign escalated when a former Quantum employee suddenly came forward claiming Jamal had created a hostile work environment. The allegations were vague and unsubstantiated, but they generated headlines and raised questions. "This is classic character assassination," Rodriguez said after interviewing the former employee and discovering he'd recently received a substantial wire transfer from an untraceable offshore account. "But it's going to be hard to prove the connection to Transcontinental." The legal proceedings continued advancing despite these distractions. Judge Maxwell, while initially appearing skeptical of their discrimination claims, proved unexpectedly methodical in allowing evidence and testimony. During a preliminary hearing, Maxwell denied the airline's motion to exclude Sullivan's prior complaint history, stating, "The pattern of behavior is directly relevant to determining whether the incident represents an isolated occurrence or systematic practice." After the hearing, Rodriguez shared an interesting piece of intelligence with Jamal. "My clerk knows Maxwell's court reporter. Apparently, his 12-year-old granddaughter saw the video of Isaiah being slapped and asked him why the flight attendant wasn't in jail for hitting a child. Made him think about the case differently. Sometimes justice hinged on such human moments, a child's simple question cutting through legal abstractions." As discovery proceeded, more damning evidence emerged. The airline's training materials included sections on passenger profiling and maintaining cabin ambience, with thinly veiled instructions for treating certain passengers differently. Former employees came forward describing unwritten rules about seating assignments and service priorities based on perceived passenger status. Assessments that routinely disadvantaged people of color regardless of their ticket class. The case was building steadily, but so was the toll on Jamal and Isaiah. The constant scrutiny, the legal maneuvering, the corporate pressure, it was exhausting. Isaiah's initial progress had plateaued, though he wasn't regressing, the ongoing stress prevented full healing. 7 months into the legal battle, Jamal received a call directly from William Bradford. The airline's CEO requested a private meeting, businessman to businessman. Against Rodriguez's advice, Jamal agreed to meet Bradford at a neutral location, a private dining room at an upscale San Francisco restaurant. He brought Samuel Turner as a witness but asked him to remain silent during the conversation. Bradford arrived looking haggard, the strain of the legal battle evident in the new lines on his face. "Mr. Washington," he began after preliminary pleasantries, "I think we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. The legal costs alone are into 8 figures for both sides, with no resolution in sight. Justice often comes at a cost," Jamal replied evenly. Bradford leaned forward. "Let's be honest with each other. You've made your point. The public is aware. Changes are already happening industry-wide because of this case. What more do you hope to accomplish by dragging this out? Full accountability, Jamal answered without hesitation. Transparent acknowledgement of systematic discrimination. Binding commitments to measurable changes. And if we were prepared to offer that, along with substantial compensation? Compensation was never the issue. Bradford's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. Then what is it you want? To destroy the airline? To humiliate me personally? Because I assure you, we cannot continue this legal battle indefinitely without taking measures to protect our business interests. Is that a threat, Mr. Bradford? A reality check. Your company is feeling the pressure too. Your board is divided. Major clients are nervous about the controversy. We both have too much to lose by continuing this fight. And yet, Jamal observed, only one of us is fighting because our child was assaulted for being black. Bradford's expression shifted, revealing momentary frustration before he controlled it. Mr. Washington, I understand you believe this incident was racially motivated, but, I don't believe it was racially motivated, Jamal interrupted. The evidence proves it was. Your own emails prove it was part of a systematic pattern encouraged by leadership. Those emails have been taken out of context, Bradford protested. When I discussed maintaining standards, I meant behavioral standards, not racial exclusion. Then why do the behavioral standards seem to be enforced almost exclusively against passengers of color? Why did Sullivan receive bonuses despite repeated complaints of racial bias? Why did your training materials include different service protocols based on passenger profiles? Bradford's jaw tightened. Look, between us, man to man. We both know certain passengers expect a certain environment in premium cabins. The market reality is that our highest-paying customers prefer familiarity. We were simply responding to customer preferences. Responding to racial biases, you mean, Jamal clarified. Enforcing segregation without calling it segregation. That's an extreme characterization, Bradford objected. We're running a business, not a social experiment. If we don't cater to our core customers' preferences, someone else will. Jamal studied Bradford carefully. Thank you for your honesty, at least. You've just admitted that discriminating against black passengers is a deliberate business strategy. Bradford's face flushed as he realized his mistake. That's not what I said, and you know it. I'm trying to have a good faith conversation here. No, you're trying to convince me to allow your airline to continue discriminating without consequences. That's not happening. Bradford's expression hardened. If that's your position, you should understand that we have resources you can't match. We've been very restrained thus far, but if pushed, we will use every tool at our disposal to protect our interests. Including threatening a 10-year-old boy? Jamal asked quietly. Hacking his school accounts? Spreading lies about him? Bradford's momentary silence was confirmation enough. This meeting is over, Jamal stated, standing. My attorney will be in touch about your attempted intimidation. As they left, Samuel Turner looked at Jamal with newfound respect. You knew he'd incriminate himself if you let him talk long enough. Jamal nodded. People like Bradford always do. They're so convinced of their righteousness that they don't even recognize when they're admitting to discrimination. Too bad the conversation wasn't recorded, Turner remarked. Jamal smiled slightly. Actually, it was. He removed a small device from his jacket pocket. Rodriguez suggested it might be prudent, given the circumstances. The recording would prove crucial in the coming weeks, as Bradford's mask of corporate responsibility completely fell away. Do you think Jamal was right to meet with Bradford against his attorney's advice? Comment number 1 if you think it was a smart strategic move to get Bradford talking, or number 2 if you think it was too risky. Don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying this story about standing up against systemic discrimination. Have you ever witnessed someone in power accidentally revealing their true biases? How far do you think Bradford will go to protect his airline's reputation now that he's been caught on tape? Subscribe to find out what happens next in this high-stakes legal battle. 3 days after the meeting with Bradford, Quantum Innovations faced its first major crisis. An anonymous source leaked documents to technology blogs suggesting the company's quantum processing breakthroughs might be overstated. The stock plummeted 23% in a single trading day. Jamal immediately recognized the attack for what it was: retaliation for the recorded conversation with Bradford. The leaked documents were internal test results deliberately taken out of context, showing early prototype failures rather than the successful final implementations. The crisis management team worked around the clock to issue corrections and demonstrate the technology's actual capabilities, but the damage was significant. Investor confidence, already shaken by the ongoing lawsuit, eroded further. Vincent Chen called an emergency board meeting. "This has gone too far," Chen declared to the assembled board members in Quantum's glass-walled conference room. "The lawsuit is no longer just a distraction, it's actively threatening the company's survival. Jamal, you need to end this now." Several other board members nodded in agreement. Only two, Dr. Miranda Jackson and Rafael Diaz, seemed uncertain. "Vincent," Jamal responded calmly, "the timing of this leak makes its source obvious. If we capitulate now, we're essentially allowing corporate blackmail to succeed. What's next? Every time we face opposition, should we simply surrender?" "This isn't about surrender," Chen countered. "It's about priorities. Your primary responsibility is to this company and its shareholders, not your personal vendetta." "Seeking accountability for racial discrimination is hardly a vendetta," Dr. Jackson interjected. As one of the few black women in quantum physics, she understood the issues at stake beyond the financial implications. Chen waved dismissively. "Whatever you want to call it, it's harming the company. I move for a vote of no confidence in Jamal's leadership unless he agrees to settle the lawsuit immediately." The boardroom fell silent. Such a vote could remove Jamal from control of his own company, the organization he had built from nothing despite constant obstacles. "Before we vote," Rafael Diaz said carefully, "I'd like to understand exactly what's at stake in the lawsuit. Not the legal details, but the principles. Jamal, what are you fighting for that's worth this risk?" Jamal considered the question thoughtfully. "When I started this company, I promised myself I would build an organization that succeeded not despite ethical practices, but because of them. We've rejected lucrative military contracts that conflicted with our values. We've implemented sustainability measures that initially cost us profit but ultimately strengthened our brand. We've created the most diverse workforce in quantum computing because we recognize that innovation requires different perspectives." He looked around the table. "The airline didn't just discriminate against my son. They've institutionalized discrimination as business strategy. If we walk away because fighting is difficult or expensive, what message does that send about who we are as a company? What would it say to our employees of color? To my son?" The board deliberated for hours. In the end, the vote was narrow, 4-3 against the motion of no confidence, with Chen and his allies visibly furious at the outcome. As the meeting adjourned, Chen delivered a final warning: "I'm giving notice of my intent to divest my shares. And I won't be the only one. You've chosen principles over prosperity, Jamal. We'll see how that works out for everyone who trusted you with their investments." The next day, Chen's resignation from the board was announced publicly. As promised, he began liquidating his substantial holdings in Quantum Innovations, creating further downward pressure on the stock price. But the corporate sabotage was just the beginning. At home, Jamal discovered sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden in his garden and evidence of attempted break-ins. His private security team, hired after the first threatening letters arrived, identified 3 separate intrusion attempts in the past week alone. More disturbing were the escalating attacks on Isaiah. The school reported multiple anonymous calls alleging child abuse, triggering mandatory investigations by Child Protective Services. Though the allegations were quickly determined to be unfounded, each investigation took an emotional toll on Isaiah, forcing him to relive his trauma through interviews with well-meaning but persistent social workers. Then came the planted story. A tabloid published claims from an unnamed, former household employee, alleging Jamal had anger management issues and had been physically abusive toward his son on multiple occasions. Though completely fabricated, the story created just enough doubt to be weaponized in both public opinion and the legal case. "They're trying to flip the narrative," Rodriguez explained during an emergency strategy session. "Make you look like the abuser rather than Sullivan. It's despicable but predictable. When powerful entities can't win on facts, they attack the victim's character." Jamal was less concerned about his own reputation than the impact on Isaiah. The boy had been making progress with Dr. Chen, gradually regaining his confidence, but each new attack seemed to set him back. "Can we shield him from this somehow?" Jamal asked. "Maybe withdraw him from school temporarily." "That might actually play into their strategy," Rodriguez cautioned. "They could spin it as you hiding him because the abuse allegations have merit." The situation worsened when Bradford made a direct appeal to Quantum's investors, sending a confidential letter that somehow leaked to financial press. The letter suggested that settling the lawsuit quickly would be in everyone's financial interest and implied that Jamal's personal agenda was destroying shareholder value. Several institutional investors contacted Jamal directly, pressuring him to resolve the matter. Some made veiled threats about shareholder lawsuits if the stock price continued to decline. The culmination of this pressure campaign came in the form of a formal settlement offer, $200 million in damages, implementation of a diversity training program, and removal of Heather Sullivan, in exchange for comprehensive NDAs and Jamal's public statement that the incident had been regrettably misinterpreted. Bradford called personally to present the offer. "This is more than generous, Jamal," he said, dropping the formality of surnames. "No discrimination case in history has settled for this amount. You could establish a foundation, fund scholarships, whatever you want. But this needs to end." "And the executive team that created and enforced these policies?" Jamal asked. "The systematic profiling of passengers? The coded training materials? We'll review our procedures," Bradford offered vaguely. "Not good enough." Bradford's tone hardened. "Don't be foolish. This fight is hurting you more than us. Your company is bleeding value. Your investors are revolting. Your son is suffering through constant scrutiny. Take the win and move on." After the call, Jamal sat alone in his home office, genuinely uncertain for the first time. Was he right to continue this fight? Was the principle worth the cost to Isaiah, to his employees, to the investors who had trusted him? As if sensing his doubt, Isaiah knocked on the office door, tablet in hand. "Dad? Can I show you something?" On the screen was a video from Isaiah's school presentation weeks earlier. Someone had posted it online where it had quietly accumulated hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of supportive comments. But what caught Jamal's attention wasn't the view count, it was the comments section. Dozens of black children and teenagers had shared their own experiences with discrimination on flights, in stores, at schools. Isaiah's courage in speaking out had created a space for others to do the same. One comment in particular stood out: "I showed this to my mom after I got followed around a store for the third time this week. She finally understood why it bothers me so much. Thank you for putting into words what I couldn't explain." Isaiah looked up at his father. "These kids are counting on us, Dad. If we give up, they'll think they should give up too when bad things happen." In that moment, Jamal's resolve crystallized. Bradford's pressure tactics had nearly worked, nearly made him question whether the fight was worth it. But Isaiah's simple reminder of the stakes beyond their personal situation renewed his determination. The next day, Jamal took two significant actions. First, He personally purchased $5 million of quantum stock on the open market, a public vote of confidence that temporarily stabilized the price. Second, he hired Petra Novak, a renowned private investigator specializing in corporate malfeasance. Follow the money, he instructed Novak. Bradford isn't just fighting this hard because of bad publicity. There's something else at stake. 3 weeks later, Novak delivered her findings in a sealed envelope. The contents were explosive. Transcontinental Airways had received substantial funding from several investment groups with connections to known white nationalist organizations. These investors had explicitly pushed for passenger comfort policies designed to maintain traditional customer demographics in premium cabins. Bradford himself had met repeatedly with representatives of these groups, accepting their capital while implementing their vision. The airline wasn't just practicing discrimination. It was being bankrolled specifically to create exclusionary spaces in the sky. Armed with this information, Rodriguez filed amended complaints adding racketeering charges and requesting punitive damages be tripled based on the deliberate nature of the discrimination scheme. Simultaneously, Jamal took a calculated risk. He recorded a simple, straightforward video statement outlining what the investigation had uncovered, including snippets of Bradford's damning recorded statements. Rather than releasing it publicly, he sent it directly to Bradford with a note: "This goes live in 48 hours unless we have a real conversation about actual change." Bradford's response was immediate and panicked, a request for a meeting the very next morning. This time, Jamal set the terms. The meeting would take place at Quantum Innovations headquarters, with Rodriguez present, and every word would be recorded with Bradford's knowledge and consent. When Bradford arrived, he looked physically ill. The polished corporate executive had been replaced by a man who hadn't slept, who knew his career and reputation hung in the balance. "Those investment connections are complicated business relationships," he began defensively. "We never explicitly endorsed any political positions. You accepted money specifically to implement discriminatory policies," Jamal replied simply. "The paper trail is clear." Bradford's shoulders sagged. "What do you want, Jamal? Really want?" "Everything we've been asking for from the beginning. Full acknowledgement of systematic discrimination. Transparent policy changes with independent oversight. Removal of all executives who participated in creating or enforcing discriminatory practices. Financial penalties substantial enough to ensure compliance going forward. And no NDAs. The public deserves to know exactly what happened and why." "That would essentially require rebuilding the entire executive structure of the airline," Bradford protested. "Yes," Jamal agreed. "It would. The board would never approve. I think they will when the alternative is what my investigator uncovered. Your choice, William." As Bradford left, visibly shaken, Rodriguez turned to Jamal with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You realize they might still choose to fight. Powerful people rarely surrender, even when cornered." "I know," Jamal acknowledged. "But for the first time, we're not the only ones with something to lose." That evening, as Jamal reviewed legal documents at home, Isaiah brought him a glass of water, a small gesture of care that had become their ritual during this difficult period. "Do you think they'll finally do the right thing, Dad?" he asked. Jamal considered the question carefully. "I think they'll do what's necessary to protect themselves. Sometimes that aligns with the right thing, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, you've already won the most important battle." "What's that?" "You refuse to be silenced. You spoke your truth. And in doing so, you've helped others find their voices too." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "Ms. Chen says that healing doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means finding purpose in the pain." "She's very wise," Jamal said, pulling his son into a hug. "And so are you." Later that night, Jamal received an unexpected call from Sofia Martinez, CEO of Rivera Technologies and one of Silicon Valley's most influential investors. Though they'd met at industry events, they weren't particularly close. Jamal, I've been watching your situation with interest, she began without preamble. My firm would like to take a significant position in quantum innovations. Say, 200 million to start. We believe the current stock price represents a substantial discount to actual value. Jamal was momentarily speechless. Such an investment would more than offset Chen's divestment and send a powerful message to the market. May I ask what prompted this decision? He finally asked. Two things, Martinez replied. First, I've always admired your technology. Second, I've been following how you've handled this lawsuit. Standing firm on principle despite enormous pressure says more about your character and leadership than any quarterly report ever could. The kind of person who refuses to compromise their values for expediency is exactly the kind of founder we want to back. As Jamal hung up, a notification appeared on his phone, an email from Judge Maxwell's clerk. The subject line read, Court Order, Summary Judgment Motion Denied. They were going to trial. The federal courthouse in San Francisco buzzed with activity as journalists, protesters, and curious onlookers gathered for what many were calling the discrimination trial of the decade. After 18 months of legal maneuvering, Judge Terrence Maxwell had denied the final attempt to dismiss the case, setting the stage for a full public reckoning. Inside the imposing building, Jamal straightened Isaiah's tie. Now 12 years old, the boy had grown taller and more self-assured during the long legal battle, though shadows of the trauma still appeared in quiet moments. Remember, Jamal said gently, you only have to tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you. Isaiah nodded solemnly. I'm ready, Dad. Rodriguez joined them, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, legal briefs organized in her trademark red folders. We've got a last-minute development, she said, her expression carefully neutral. Heather Sullivan has contacted us through her personal attorney. She wants to meet privately before proceedings begin. Jamal's eyebrows rose. Sullivan. Why now? She claims she has information that could change everything about the case. Her attorney was vague but insisted it would benefit our side. In a small conference room down the hall from the courtroom, Heather Sullivan looked markedly different from the confident flight attendant who had slapped Isaiah 18 months earlier. Her carefully maintained blonde hair had grown out showing dark roots, her posture was hunched, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. Thank you for agreeing to meet, she began, voice barely above a whisper. I know you have no reason to trust me. You're right about that, Jamal replied evenly. Why are we here? Sullivan took a deep breath. Because I can't live with myself anymore. What happened on that flight, what I did to your son, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was exactly what I was trained to do. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were training materials, evaluation forms, and internal memos never produced during discovery. They taught us to identify problem passengers using criteria that were clearly racial without ever saying the word race, Sullivan explained. We were rewarded for maintaining cabin standards by making certain passengers feel unwelcome. I was one of the best at it. Her voice broke. That's why I kept getting promoted despite the complaints. Why come forward now? Rodriguez asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Because they abandoned me, Sullivan said bitterly. Bradford promised to stand behind me, said I was just doing my job. Then they put me on leave, cut my benefits, and told me to keep quiet while they painted me as a bad apple who didn't represent company values. Meanwhile, the executives who created the policies are still collecting bonuses. As Rodriguez examined the documents, Sullivan turned to Isaiah directly. What I did to you was inexcusable, she said, tears forming. I was taught to see you as a problem rather than a child. The system trained me to react that way, but I still made the choice to hit you. I am truly sorry. Isaiah studied her face for a long moment before responding. Why did you believe them? When they told you people like me were problems? The directness of the question seemed to catch Sullivan off guard. I never thought about it that way. I guess it was easier to accept than to question. She looked down. That's not an excuse. Just the truth. As the meeting concluded, Sullivan's attorney outlined her willingness to testify about the systematic nature of the discrimination, including naming executives who had personally instructed her to be more vigilant with passengers of color. Will you accept her testimony? Rodriguez asked Jamal as they walked back toward the courtroom. Yes, he replied after consideration. This was never about punishing Sullivan. It was about exposing the system that enabled and encouraged her behavior. The trial began with opening statements that afternoon. Bradford, sitting at the defense table surrounded by high-priced attorneys, avoided eye contact with Jamal. The airline's strategy became immediately clear: paint Sullivan as a rogue employee whose actions violated company policy, express regret for the unfortunate incident, and deny any systematic discrimination. This strategy collapsed spectacularly on the third day when Sullivan took the stand. Under oath, she detailed the unwritten but clearly understood practices of passenger profiling, the coded language used in training, and the rewards for flight attendants who maintained standards by discouraging certain passengers from returning to premium cabins. "We never said, keep black passengers out," Sullivan testified. "We said, ensure passenger comfort and maintain the premium experience. But we all knew what that meant. When I received complaints from white passengers about feeling uncomfortable with certain seatmates, I was instructed to be especially attentive to those white passengers while finding ways to make others feel unwelcome." The courtroom fell silent as Sullivan described specific training sessions where flight attendants role-played scenarios involving difficult passengers, invariably portrayed as people of color in first class who needed to be managed appropriately. "The trainer told us, some people don't understand the expected behaviors in premium cabins. It's your job to educate them or discourage their return." We all understood the subtext. Bradford's face grew increasingly pale as Sullivan's testimony continued. When she produced emails from him personally congratulating her for handling a situation firmly, after a previous incident involving a black passenger, his attorneys requested a recess. When court reconvened the next day, Air Marshal Gregory Pearson had unexpectedly been added to the witness list, not by the defense, but as another whistleblower. "I was instructed to maintain a visible presence when certain passenger demographics were seated in premium cabins," Pearson testified, his military bearing at odds with his evident discomfort. "The briefings never explicitly mentioned race, but the patterns were clear. When disputes arose, our training directed us to make certain assumptions about which party was the aggressor. And who was typically assumed to be the aggressor?" Rodriguez asked. "Passengers of color, particularly black males," Pearson admitted. "We were taught to read certain behaviors as threatening when displayed by some passengers but as merely assertive when displayed by others. By the end of the first week, Bradford was visibly desperate." During a lunch recess, he approached Jamal directly, security teams hovering nearby. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Name your price. We'll double whatever you're thinking. Triple it. Just end this now before it destroys everything." Jamal regarded him steadily. "It's not about money, William. It never was." "Then what? Revenge? You want to see me ruined? Fine, I'll resign. Just stop the testimony." Again, missing the point, Jamal replied. "This is about changing a system that taught your employees it was acceptable to discriminate, that taught my son he was less valuable as a human being because of his skin color. Your resignation alone doesn't fix that." Bradford's desperation turned to anger. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so different? You think Quantum doesn't have skeletons I could expose? Try it," Jamal said simply. "Unlike you, I've never instructed my employees to discriminate against anyone. My conscience is clear." As Bradford stalked away, Samuel Turner approached with breaking news on his tablet: "Major investment firms are demanding Bradford's immediate resignation. Stock is in freefall. The board has called an emergency meeting. The turning point came unexpectedly on the trial's 7th day. During a routine review of evidence, Rodriguez discovered a server address in Sullivan's documents that hadn't been disclosed during discovery. When questioned, the airline's attorneys claimed ignorance of its existence. Judge Maxwell, increasingly frustrated with the defense's tactics, ordered an immediate forensic examination of the server. What they found shattered any remaining defense. The server contained a sophisticated database tracking passenger compliance scores, an internal rating system that flagged certain passengers as service-intensive or premium cabin incompatible. Statistical analysis revealed that black passengers were 4 times more likely to receive negative ratings than white passengers with identical behavior patterns. More damning still were the executive emails discussing how to implement these ratings while avoiding explicit discrimination claims. Bradford himself had written, "The beauty of this system is that we never have to mention race. We just track behaviors that happen to correlate with certain demographics." When confronted with this evidence, Bradford's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. In a moment of courtroom drama that would later be reenacted in documentaries, he shouted at his attorneys, "This is a witch hunt. Everyone in the industry does this. We just got caught." The outburst was immediately entered into the record. That evening, the airline's board of directors voted unanimously to remove Bradford as CEO. By morning, they had authorized settlement discussions with unprecedented latitude for concessions. Sofia Martinez's investment in Quantum had not only stabilized the company financially but sparked interest from other socially conscious investors. The stock had recovered most of its losses, and the IPO, delayed but not derailed, was back on track with stronger interest than before. Meanwhile, Isaiah had become something of a reluctant young hero in educational circles. His essay about the experience had been published in several major outlets and was being incorporated into school discussions about discrimination and activism. What had begun as a traumatic incident was transforming into a powerful platform for change. As settlement discussions began in earnest, Jamal received an unexpected call from Bradford's replacement, Jennifer Winters, a former prosecutor who had been brought in specifically to reform the airline. "Mr. Washington," she began, "I've spent the past 72 hours reviewing this case in its entirety. What happened to your son was inexcusable, and the systematic discrimination uncovered in our company is appalling. I'm not calling to negotiate or minimize. I'm calling to say that we are prepared to accept full responsibility and make whatever changes are necessary to ensure this never happens again." Jamal was momentarily taken aback by the straightforward approach. "That's refreshing to hear. I believe in addressing problems directly," Winters replied. "I've already initiated termination proceedings for every executive implicated in these discriminatory policies. But frankly, I need your help to truly transform this airline. Your experience, your insights, and yes, your forgiveness, though I know we haven't earned that yet." The conversation marked the beginning of a collaborative rather than adversarial resolution. Over the next 2 weeks, with Judge Maxwell's encouragement, the two sides worked to craft a settlement that went far beyond monetary damages to address the root causes of discrimination. The final agreement, announced on the steps of the courthouse, included a record-setting financial settlement, with half the funds dedicated to establishing the Isaiah Washington Foundation for Equality in Transportation, comprehensive retraining of all staff with programs developed by civil rights experts, implementation of transparent anti-discrimination policies with regular independent audits, creation of a passenger bill of rights with clear procedures for reporting and addressing discrimination, establishment of a diverse advisory board with actual authority to recommend changes, regular public reporting of demographic service data and complaint resolutions, industry-leading hiring and promotion practices to ensure diversity at all levels. Most significantly, there were no non-disclosure agreements. The full details of the discrimination program would be made public, allowing other airlines to learn from Transcontinental's failures and passengers to hold them accountable for promised changes. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Isaiah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Did we win?" he asked quietly. Jamal looked down at his son, seeing not just the boy he'd always been but the young man he was becoming, thoughtful, resilient, and unafraid to speak truth to power. "Yes," Jamal replied. "But more importantly, we changed something that needed changing. And that's worth more than just winning." The federal courthouse in San Francisco buzzed with activity as journalists, protesters, and curious onlookers gathered for what many were calling the discrimination trial of the decade. After 18 months of legal maneuvering, Judge Terrence Maxwell had denied the final attempt to dismiss the case, setting the stage for a full public reckoning. Inside the imposing building, Jamal straightened Isaiah's tie. Now 12 years old, the boy had grown taller and more self-assured during the long legal battle, though shadows of the trauma still appeared in quiet moments. "Remember," Jamal said gently, "you only have to tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you." Isaiah nodded solemnly. "I'm ready, Dad." Rodriguez joined them, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, legal briefs organized in her trademark red folders. "We've got a last-minute development," she said, her expression carefully neutral. "Heather Sullivan has contacted us through her personal attorney. She wants to meet privately before proceedings begin." Jamal's eyebrows rose. "Sullivan? Why now?" "She claims she has information that could change everything about the case. Her attorney was vague but insisted it would benefit our side." In a small conference room down the hall from the courtroom, Heather Sullivan looked markedly different from the confident flight attendant who had slapped Isaiah 18 months earlier. Her carefully maintained blonde hair had grown out showing dark roots, her posture was hunched, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began, voice barely above a whisper. "I know you have no reason to trust me." "You're right about that," Jamal replied evenly. "Why are we here?" Sullivan took a deep breath. "Because I can't live with myself anymore. What happened on that flight, what I did to your son, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was exactly what I was trained to do." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were training materials, evaluation forms, and internal memos never produced during discovery. "They taught us to identify problem passengers using criteria that were clearly racial without ever saying the word race," Sullivan explained. "We were rewarded for maintaining cabin standards by making certain passengers feel unwelcome. I was one of the best at it." Her voice broke. "That's why I kept getting promoted despite the complaints." "Why come forward now?" Rodriguez asked, skepticism evident in her tone. "Because they abandoned me," Sullivan said bitterly. "Bradford promised to stand behind me, said I was just doing my job. Then they put me on leave, cut my benefits, and told me to keep quiet while they painted me as a bad apple who didn't represent company values. Meanwhile, the executives who created the policies are still collecting bonuses." As Rodriguez examined the documents, Sullivan turned to Isaiah directly. "What I did to you was inexcusable," she said, tears forming. "I was taught to see you as a problem rather than a child. The system trained me to react that way, but I still made the choice to hit you. I am truly sorry." Isaiah studied her face for a long moment before responding. "Why did you believe them? When they told you people like me were problems?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Sullivan off guard. I never thought about it that way. I guess it was easier to accept than to question." She looked down. "That's not an excuse. Just the truth." As the meeting concluded, Sullivan's attorney outlined her willingness to testify about the systematic nature of the discrimination, including naming executives who had personally instructed her to be more vigilant with passengers of color. "Will you accept her testimony?" Rodriguez asked Jamal as they walked back toward the courtroom. "Yes," he replied after consideration. This was never about punishing Sullivan. It was about exposing the system that enabled and encouraged her behavior. The trial began with opening statements that afternoon. Bradford, sitting at the defense table surrounded by high-priced attorneys, avoided eye contact with Jamal. The airline strategy became immediately clear: paint Sullivan as a rogue employee whose actions violated company policy, express regret for the unfortunate incident, and deny any systematic discrimination. This strategy collapsed spectacularly on the third day when Sullivan took the stand. Under oath, she detailed the unwritten but clearly understood practices of passenger profiling, the coded language used in training, and the rewards for flight attendants who maintain standards, by discouraging certain passengers from returning to premium cabins. "We never said, keep black passengers out," Sullivan testified. "We said, ensure passenger comfort and maintain the premium experience. But we all knew what that meant. When I received complaints from white passengers about feeling uncomfortable with certain seatmates, I was instructed to be especially attentive to those white passengers while finding ways to make others feel unwelcome." The courtroom fell silent as Sullivan described specific training sessions where flight attendants role-played scenarios involving difficult passengers, invariably portrayed as people of color in first class who needed to be managed appropriately. The trainer told us, "Some people don't understand the expected behaviors in premium cabins. It's your job to educate them or discourage their return." We all understood the subtext. Bradford's face grew increasingly pale as Sullivan's testimony continued. When she produced emails from him personally congratulating her for handling a situation firmly, after a previous incident involving a black passenger, his attorneys requested a recess. When court reconvened the next day, Air Marshal Gregory Pearson had unexpectedly been added to the witness list, not by the defense, but as another whistleblower. "I was instructed to maintain a visible presence when certain passenger demographics were seated in premium cabins," Pearson testified, his military bearing at odds with his evident discomfort. "The briefings never explicitly mentioned race, but the patterns were clear. When disputes arose, our training directed us to make certain assumptions about which party was the aggressor. And who was typically assumed to be the aggressor?" Rodriguez asked. "Passengers of color, particularly black males," Pearson admitted. "We were taught to read certain behaviors as threatening when displayed by some passengers but as merely assertive when displayed by others." By the end of the first week, Bradford was visibly desperate. During a lunch recess, he approached Jamal directly, security teams hovering nearby. "You've made your point," he said quietly. "Name your price. We'll double whatever you're thinking. Triple it. Just end this now before it destroys everything." Jamal regarded him steadily. "It's not about money, William. It never was." "Then what? Revenge? You want to see me ruined? Fine, I'll resign. Just stop the testimony." Again, missing the point, Jamal replied. "This is about changing a system that taught your employees it was acceptable to discriminate, that taught my son he was less valuable as a human being because of his skin color. Your resignation alone doesn't fix that." Bradford's desperation turned to anger. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so different? You think Quantum doesn't have skeletons I could expose? Try it," Jamal said simply. "Unlike you, I've never instructed my employees to discriminate against anyone. My conscience is clear." As Bradford stalked away, Samuel Turner approached with breaking news on his tablet: "Major investment firms are demanding Bradford's immediate resignation. Stock is in freefall. The board has called an emergency meeting." The turning point came unexpectedly on the trial's 7th day. During a routine review of evidence, Rodriguez discovered a server address in Sullivan's documents that hadn't been disclosed during discovery. When questioned, the airline's attorneys claimed ignorance of its existence. Judge Maxwell, increasingly frustrated with the defense's tactics, ordered an immediate forensic examination of the server. What they found shattered any remaining defense. The server contained a sophisticated database tracking passenger compliance scores, an internal rating system that flagged certain passengers as service-intensive or premium cabin incompatible. Statistical analysis revealed that black passengers were 4 times more likely to receive negative ratings than white passengers with identical behavior patterns. More damning still were the executive emails discussing how to implement these ratings while avoiding explicit discrimination claims. Bradford himself had written, "The beauty of this system is that we never have to mention race. We just track behaviors that happen to correlate with certain demographics." When confronted with this evidence, Bradford's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled completely. In a moment of courtroom drama that would later be reenacted in documentaries, he shouted at his attorneys, "This is a witch hunt. Everyone in the industry does this. We just got caught." The outburst was immediately entered into the record. That evening, the airline's board of directors voted unanimously to remove Bradford as CEO. By morning, they had authorized settlement discussions with unprecedented latitude for concessions. Sofia Martinez's investment in Quantum had not only stabilized the company financially but sparked interest from other socially conscious investors. The stock had recovered most of its losses, and the IPO, delayed but not derailed, was back on track with stronger interest than before. Meanwhile, Isaiah had become something of a reluctant young hero in educational circles. His essay about the experience had been published in several major outlets and was being incorporated into school discussions about discrimination and activism. What had begun as a traumatic incident was transforming into a powerful platform for change. As settlement discussions began in earnest, Jamal received an unexpected call from Bradford's replacement, Jennifer Winters, a former prosecutor who had been brought in specifically to reform the airline. "Mr. Washington," she began, "I've spent the past 72 hours reviewing this case in its entirety. What happened to your son was inexcusable, and the systematic discrimination uncovered in our company is appalling. I'm not calling to negotiate or minimize. I'm calling to say that we are prepared to accept full responsibility and make whatever changes are necessary to ensure this never happens again." Jamal was momentarily taken aback by the straightforward approach. "That's refreshing to hear. I believe in addressing problems directly," Winters replied. "I've already initiated termination proceedings for every executive implicated in these discriminatory policies. But frankly, I need your help to truly transform this airline. Your experience, your insights, and yes, your forgiveness, though I know we haven't earned that yet." The conversation marked the beginning of a collaborative rather than adversarial resolution. Over the next 2 weeks, with Judge Maxwell's encouragement, the two sides worked to craft a settlement that went far beyond monetary damages to address the root causes of discrimination. The final agreement, announced on the steps of the courthouse, included a record-setting financial settlement, with half the funds dedicated to establishing the Isaiah Washington Foundation for Equality in Transportation, comprehensive retraining of all staff with programs developed by civil rights experts, implementation of transparent anti-discrimination policies with regular independent audits, creation of a passenger bill of rights with clear procedures for reporting and addressing discrimination, establishment of a diverse advisory board with actual authority to recommend changes, regular public reporting of demographic service data and complaint resolutions, industry-leading hiring and promotion practices to ensure diversity at all levels. Most significantly, there were no non-disclosure agreements. The full details of the discrimination program would be made public, allowing other airlines to learn from Transcontinental's failures and passengers to hold them accountable for promised changes. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, Isaiah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Did we win?" he asked quietly. Jamal looked down at his son, seeing not just the boy he'd always been but the young man he was becoming, thoughtful, resilient, and unafraid to speak truth to power. "Yes," Jamal replied. "But more importantly, we changed something that needed changing. And that's worth more than just winning." 1 year later, Jamal and Isaiah Washington walked through the premium terminal at San Francisco International Airport. The differences were subtle but significant: more diverse staff at every level, passengers of various backgrounds moving through first-class lines without the sideways glances and questioning looks that had once been commonplace. Transcontinental Airways, emerging from its trial by fire, had implemented what industry publications now called the Washington Standards. Comprehensive anti-discrimination policies that were becoming the benchmark for the entire aviation industry. 3 other major carriers had voluntarily adopted similar measures rather than risk becoming the next lawsuit target. "Mr. Washington," called a cheerful voice. The gate attendant, a young black woman named Tiana Jackson, smiled warmly. "Your flight to Chicago is ready for pre-boarding whenever you're set." There was no hesitation in her manner, no subtle assessment of whether they belonged in the first-class line. Just professional courtesy extended equally to all premium passengers. "Thank you, Ms. Jackson," Jamal replied, returning her smile. As they moved through the jetway, Isaiah whispered, "Remember the last time we flew together? The gate agent could barely look at us." "Things change," Jamal said simply. "Sometimes faster than we expect, when enough people demand it." Boarding the aircraft, they were greeted by a flight crew that reflected the diversity of the passengers they served. The lead flight attendant, a Filipino man named Raymond Cruz, welcomed them by name and directed them to their seats with genuine warmth. Once settled in the luxurious first-class cabin, Isaiah pulled out his tablet, not to escape into games as he once might have, but to review the quarterly report for the Isaiah Washington Foundation. At 12, he had insisted on being actively involved in the organization bearing his name, particularly its youth advocacy programs. The foundation had already achieved remarkable success, funding education about passenger rights, providing legal support for discrimination cases, and developing training materials used by transportation companies nationwide. Most meaningfully to Isaiah, it had created a peer support network for young people who had experienced discrimination in public spaces. "Dad," Isaiah said, looking up from the tablet, "the Denver Airport program launches next month. They want us both there for the ribbon cutting." Jamal nodded. "We'll make it happen." A young black flight attendant approached with pre-flight beverages. Her name tag read, "Alicia Robinson, trainee." "Mr. Washington," she said, a slight tremor in her voice betraying her nervousness, "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to thank you personally. I was in college studying hospitality when your case made headlines. The changes you fought for are the reason I felt confident applying to Transcontinental." She set down their drinks with professional precision. Before, everyone knew certain airlines had unwritten rules about who they wanted in customer-facing positions. Now merit actually matters. "That means a lot to hear," Jamal replied. "Thank you for sharing that." After she moved on to the next passengers, Isaiah looked thoughtful. "It's weird to think that something so awful led to all this good." "That's often how progress happens," Jamal observed. "Not in grand gestures, but in people standing firm when it would be easier to give in." The past year had brought significant changes for both Washingtons. Quantum Innovations had successfully gone public, with Jamal insisting that the company's ethical stance on discrimination be explicitly included in its corporate charter. The stock had performed exceptionally well, particularly after several government contracts specifically cited the company's leadership in corporate responsibility as a factor in their selection. Isaiah had transferred to a progressive school with a strong emphasis on social justice and STEM education. His initial wariness had given way to renewed confidence as he found himself among peers and teachers who valued both his intellectual gifts and his activism. The nightmares had gradually subsided, replaced by a sense of purpose that Dr. Chin called post-traumatic growth, finding meaning and strength through adversity. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Jamal reflected on the many offers he'd received since the case concluded. Political consultations, board positions, even suggestions he run for office. He had declined most, preferring to focus on his company and, more importantly, his son. "What are you thinking about?" Isaiah asked, noticing his father's contemplative expression. "How sometimes our greatest contributions come from our darkest moments," Jamal replied. "When your mother was diagnosed, she said something I'll never forget, we don't choose our challenges, but we do choose what we build from them." Isaiah nodded, having heard stories of his mother's courage throughout his life. "She would be proud of what we built, wouldn't she?" "Incredibly proud," Jamal affirmed. Especially of you. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure for Chicago, where Jamal would be delivering the keynote at a conference on corporate responsibility, with Isaiah introducing him, their first time sharing a professional stage. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Jamal thought about the journey that had brought them here. Not just the physical journey from Atlanta to San Francisco 18 months ago, but the longer path from discrimination to accountability, from trauma to transformation. The lawsuit had never been about money or revenge. It had been about refusing to accept that some injustices were simply the cost of moving through the world in a black body. About teaching Isaiah that speaking truth to power wasn't futile, even when the odds seemed overwhelming. Most importantly, it had been about ensuring that the next child who boarded a plane, entered a store, or walked through a school wouldn't have to calculate their worth based on the color of their skin. The aircraft lifted smoothly into the air, banking toward the east as it climbed. Isaiah looked out the window at the sprawling city below, then back at his father. "We did something that matters, didn't we?" he asked. "We did," Jamal confirmed. "And we're just getting started." As the plane leveled off and the seatbelt sign dinged off, Alicia returned to check on the first-class cabin. This time, her service was equally attentive to all passengers, not because of special training or supervision, but because the system itself had begun to change. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Jamal Washington smiled, thinking of how a single moment of injustice, met with unwavering resolve, had rippled outward to touch countless lives. Sometimes the greatest legacy came not from what you built for yourself, but from what you refused to accept for others. What would you do if faced with discrimination? Would you have the courage to stand up like Jamal and Isaiah did, even when it would be easier to stay silent? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one person really can make a difference. Thank you for joining me on this journey of justice and transformation. Until next time. This story reminds us that systemic change begins with individual courage. When Jamal and Isaiah Washington refused to accept discrimination as simply the way things are, they sparked a transformation far beyond their personal situation. Their journey teaches us several powerful lessons. First, speaking truth to power works, not always immediately, but persistence eventually breaks through even the most entrenched systems. The Washingtons faced intimidation, character assassination, and financial pressure, yet their commitment to justice ultimately prevailed. Second, accountability requires transparency. By refusing confidential settlements and NDAs, Jamal ensured the airline couldn't hide its discriminatory practices, forcing industry-wide reform rather than a private payoff. Third, children learn by example. Isaiah witnessed his father standing firm on principle despite enormous pressure, teaching him that his dignity was worth fighting for and that one voice can create meaningful change. Most importantly, this story shows that confronting discrimination isn't just about seeking justice for yourself, it's about creating a more equitable world for everyone who comes after you. The Washingtons' courage transformed an industry, established new standards, and empowered countless others to speak up against injustice. Real change rarely comes easily or quickly, but as this story proves, it always begins with someone refusing to accept the unacceptable.